Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. It was actually just announced earlier this afternoon that Kansas City Chief quarterback Patrick Mahomes has agreed to a 10-year extension worth $450 million. The injury guarantee is $140 million per source. The contract does not contain language that ties its value to a percentage of the salary cap, but it is right now the richest deal in sports history. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this contract, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Patrick Mahomes as a player and just things I've noticed throughout his NFL career so far with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think when you look at Pat Mahomes in his career so far, it's been pretty crazy. Coming out of college, coming out at Texas Tech, I think a lot of people doubted Pat Mahomes and how good he could really be coming out of the college level. We all know historically the struggles that many quarterbacks throughout the Big 12 have had in the NFL. As you could see, Pat Mahomes was actually the first quarterback in the history of the National Football League from a school in the Big 12 to win a playoff game. And that's a crazy stat to me because there have just been so many quarterbacks to come out of that league, and the fact that he was the first one to win a playoff game, that's just a crazy stat. But anyway, Mahomes has always had the incredible arm talent. He's always had the great weapons since he's been the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs. But the fact is that Pat Mahomes right now, when you compare him to the other players in the National Football League, specifically the other quarterbacks in the National Football League, this dude is just on another level. When you look at it, he's only started on the Kansas City Chiefs for 2 years. That's not that long. Most quarterbacks, when they get to year 2 or year 3 or year 4, are really ready to take that next step. They're really ready to take that breakout and have a breakout season. And Pat Mahomes literally did that as a rookie. Now, I know what a lot of you guys are probably saying right now. You're saying, Zach, you're going to mention, right, that Pat Mahomes didn't play until the last game of the regular season in a game that really didn't mean anything to the Kansas City Chiefs because they already had locked up their playoff spot at the end of his rookie year. And what I will say is this, is that I think he just got drafted into the right situation and the right scenario. And I think, I'm not saying the only reason why Pat Mahomes is so good, and I'm not saying that the only reason why he got this contract to be the highest paid player in the history of sports is because of the situation he landed in. All I'm saying is, I think there's a big difference between Pat Mahomes, the first 3 seasons of his career, if he lands in Kansas City like he did, and when you compare that to Pat Mahomes possibly landing in a place like New York on the New York Jets or the Chicago Bears, I don't know if it's guaranteed for us to say that he'd be as good in those spots as he was on the Kansas City Chiefs over the past 2 seasons. But that's kind of irrelevant now because Pat Mahomes is going to be a Kansas City Chief for the next 12 years as they added the 10-year extension to the last 2 years of his rookie deal. And it's not really a surprise. We all kind of saw this coming, and it's interesting that the Kansas City Chiefs were the first team to do this out of Dallas, out of Houston, to pay their quarterback. The other 2 quarterbacks I've mentioned, Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott, are kind of also in the same boat as Mahomes, expecting a contract from their current team later on during this current offseason. But with Pat Mahomes, I mean, it's just crazy what this guy has done since he's been in the league, especially when you compare him to some of the other players at his position and in his draft class. Because Pat Mahomes, I started off this segment talking about his college career out of Texas Tech and the fact that not a lot of other Big 12 quarterbacks have done that good of a job in the NFL, winning playoff games specifically. But in that 2017 draft, Pat Mahomes, you could have made the argument, had the best college stats. I know Deshaun Watson was more of a winner. It's pretty ironic that Mitch Trubisky was the first quarterback taken in that draft when not only clearly today in 2020, he is the worst quarterback out of the group of three, but he also had the least amount of playing time out of that group of three. But Ryan Pace, the GM of the Chicago Bears, really did think deep down that Trubisky was the better quarterback than Mahomes and Watson, and he ended up pulling the trigger there. But when you look at Pat Mahomes and him signing this 10-year extension and being a Kansas City Chief for the next 12 years. And the crazy thing is, when I look at the amount of money on this deal, a 10-year deal worth $450 million with the injury guarantee of $140 million per source. That's from Adam Schefter. The contract does not contain language that ties its value to a percentage of the salary cap. So when I see that number, it's like $450 million. And even though that is a crazy amount of money, as I said earlier, this contract and this announcement of Patrick Mahomes getting paid wasn't that big of a surprise, because this dude, in his first 2 years of starting for the Kansas City Chiefs, has won a Super Bowl MVP, and a regular season MVP, 4 playoff games, and his only playoff loss was a heartbreaking overtime loss to Tom Brady, the best quarterback of all time, and the New England Patriots. And if you remember, the Kansas City Chiefs should have actually won that game when Dee Ford, their former defensive lineman, who is now a member of the San Francisco 49ers, lined up offsides, and the Patriots took advantage with the second chance and ended up winning the game. But when you look at the Pat Mahomes, the crazy thing about him is this. I think a lot of us pretty easily put him in the conversation in terms of the best quarterbacks in the league right now. He is, no doubt about it, the best quarterback in the National Football League right now. So when we see him get paid, even though it's a crazy amount of money, we're going to be like, all right, like, it's Pat Mahomes. Like, he's a beast. He's a monster. Like, you can't be surprised. Like, we kind of knew this was coming. But I think when you look at Pat Mahomes and his career through the first couple of years, and you compare it to some of his peers at the quarterback position in the NFL, I think that's when it really hits you just how crazy this dude's career has been so far. And the fact is that he could get even better, which is really, really scary if you're not a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs. So when you compare the quarterbacks in his same draft class, obviously Mitch Trubisky is a wash, because we all know he's just not very good. Obviously Pat Mahomes is much better than Mitch Trubisky. There's no point in even discussing that. But let's compare him to Deshaun Watson, because right now, I'll totally admit it. If you ask me, Zach, there are so many good young quarterbacks across the National Football League. If you were to take your top 3, who would they be? And I think basically everyone, and by the way, Russell Wilson is not included in this conversation. I would say quarterbacks that are the age of 25 or younger. If you're going to give me the choice to pick 3, I'm taking Pat, I'm taking Deshaun, I'm taking Lamar. I think you could make an argument for some other guys, but right now, I feel pretty comfortable and pretty confident that mostly everyone is taking those 3 guys. And I feel like for that reason, we kind of all, put those 3 guys into the same category when we talk about the best young quarterbacks in the league, because when you compare them to everyone else, yeah, Pat, Lamar, and Deshaun, when you look at Lamar Jackson and the MVP season that he had last year, that was obviously super impressive. You look at Deshaun Watson, he's put up better numbers than basically any other quarterback, not named those 2 guys, under the age of 25. But when you look at those 3 guys, just those 3, separately, Pat Mahomes is in a separate class from Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson. And I'm not just saying that because Pat Mahomes has a career record of 2-0 against Lamar Jackson. As good as Lamar Jackson was last season, and I did think that throughout all of last season, if you were just going to take this regular season, right, 1-16, I don't think anyone's going to argue with you that the Ravens were the best team in the National Football League. They went 14-2. They had the MVP quarterback. They were really good. But the Chiefs ended up winning the Super Bowl because they had the best quarterback and the best player in the playoffs. And Pat Mahomes has proven that he could win in the playoffs and he could win on football's most highest level. Lamar Jackson hasn't done that. Deshaun Watson, I think, he has a playoff win, and I think you could kind of go 50-50 of who would you rather have, Lamar Jackson or Deshaun Watson. I think right now, if you were to force me to choose one, I would probably pick Deshaun Watson just because he's a better pure passer, but it's really close. It's 50-50. Lamar Jackson has an MVP. Deshaun Watson does not. But that's not even what we're doing here. We're comparing Deshaun to Pat. And Pat beat Deshaun in their one and only meeting in the playoffs last year. And we all know that the Texans had a big lead in that game, and the Chiefs ended up coming back. So it's going to be interesting to see where and how much money do Deshaun and Dak Prescott get paid compared to Mahomes. And we're going to get into the Dallas Cowboys probably on Friday's podcast the next time we talk NFL. But we were all saying all offseason that out of those three teams, the Chiefs, the Texans, and the Cowboys, the team that pays their quarterback first is probably going to end up being in the best spot because we all know how the market works in the NFL. When three guys separately across the league are due to get paid, then the first one that gets paid usually gets the least because the second and third want to up that and the player wants to up it. So it's going to be interesting to see in this situation when Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott are clearly less talented and less accomplished than Pat Mahomes. It's going to be interesting to see if they will get the same amount of money as the defending Super Bowl MVP.